I'm a retired lieutenant with the New York City Fire Department. I'm now retired for disability because of my injuries that happened that day. I was a senior firefighter right up the block, Engine 10, for 16 years. I was promoted to lieutenant in 1996, and they had me working in Brooklyn and Bedford-Stuyvesant, Crown Heights, very busy firehouses. And on that morning, September 11th, I was actually convalescing from another injury. I was at a fire about a couple of months before, and my thumb was cut off. They had to reattach my thumb at a fire. And during the convalescing period, they gave me a desk job working in headquarters on the other side of the Brooklyn Bridge. Well, I was on my way to a big meeting that morning at 9 o'clock in Rockefeller Center, and I left the office about 20 to 9 in the morning. And as I left the building, headquarters, about a mile away from here, somebody said a plane just at the World Trade Center. Well, my biggest worry was that there would be so many police cars, fire engines, and ambulances coming to New York, into Manhattan, I'll never get to my meeting. Because I'm thinking it's some little local private plane, a little too close, broke a couple of windows, but it's going to be news all over New York City, and everybody and their mother is going to try and get to the towers. So I had 3 college kids with me. They were in a special program called the cadet program. They were college kids trying to become firefighters, and part of their program as being cadets, they had to become emergency medical technicians. Well, they were on the way to the meeting with me that morning, and we were coming over the Brooklyn Bridge, and the North Tower had just been struck about 4 minutes before, and I'm looking up. Originally, I'm thinking it's no big deal until I get onto the Brooklyn Bridge, and I'm looking up, and I could see the North Tower has 8 floors of fire. 8 floors of fire in any building, especially a high-rise building, is an uncontrollable fire. And the cadets are in my car, young kids, college kids, and they look up and they were shocked. And they says to me, "What do you think? This is me. What do you think is going to happen?" And my first words, I says, "Everybody on the upper part of that building is going to die." And I said, "The building is going to collapse." They says, "What do you mean?" I said, "That building is going to collapse." So I immediately made my way to my old firehouse right up the block where we started the tour. I parked my car in the back of the firehouse, and me and the 3 cadets, we ran around the front of the firehouse, and both doors were open to the firehouse. Engine 10 and Ladder Company 10 had already responded to the impact of the first jet. Well, me and the cadets tried to run into the firehouse, but civilians, people from the neighborhood and from the buildings, were laying all over the floor of the firehouse. A lot of them had been struck by the jet fuel of the first impact. Some of them had burns, some of them had broken bones, some were screaming. I couldn't even get into the firehouse. I had to kind of like jump over them to grab a helmet, coat, boots, gloves, because I wanted to make it to the North Tower. And I asked 3 college kids to please stay inside the firehouse, treat them, call ambulances, get them to the hospital. I'll come back later. So I grabbed the equipment, I put the coat and pants and helmet on and gloves, boots. I run out of the firehouse, and I run about 15 feet, and I hear a noise. I hear, "Nyeh." I look up, and the second jet came right over my head. I was right underneath it, and I watched it go through the South Tower. And Liberty Street just shook like this. And I turned around, and luckily the doors of the firehouse were still open. I ran back into the firehouse, and a big, huge fireball hit the street right where I was standing. And at that point, I realized it was a terrorist attack. Now, I told you before that when I went to college, I was studying structural engineering. As a matter of fact, when I was in college, we used to come to the World Trade Center on class trips to study this new novel design, to see what was so different about it, and to see it firsthand as the other buildings were going up. So now I know very well that these buildings will collapse, but nobody believes me. But I'm not really thinking the collapse is going to happen until about 2 to 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Subconsciously, I'm saying between 2 and 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the buildings are going to come down. We have about 4 to 5 hours to get everybody out of the towers and the surrounding buildings, tell everybody run to Brooklyn, and Lower Manhattan's never going to be the same again. Well, at that time, all the volunteer ambulances from Brooklyn are all coming out of the tunnel, and they're coming down West Street, and they're going up Liberty. They want to set up a triage area in the lobby of the South Tower. And I told them they all have to get out. And he says, "Why?" I said, "The building's going to collapse." He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "These buildings are going to collapse. I didn't want to lose the emergency medical crews." They gave me a hard time, and they said I had no authority making them leave. That, you know, this was an emergency and they were going to set up. I said, make a long story short, I physically forced them. I got the last ambulance crew out of the South Tower and away from the building, and I'm underneath the South Tower. I hear a rumble and a roar, and I look up, and here comes the building. So I said to myself, "You jerk, you're the one who knew this building was going to collapse, and you put yourself right underneath it." So I said, I'm like, I know I'm not going to outrun a 110-story building. I'm saying if I could run and make it underneath this silver bridge right here, maybe they could identify my body when they find me. That's all. I'm worried about being identified, because I'm worried that my family will never. I'm thinking if I'm crushed on the 110-story building, they'll never find anything of me. But if I can make it underneath that bridge, maybe they'll recover some part of me and identify me. Well, I started running to make it underneath that bridge. I ran about 20 steps, and as the building was collapsing, you have 110 stories of building. In between each floor is a lot of air. So as each floor is coming down, it's pushing air out horizontally under tremendous pressure. Well, the air caught the back of my helmet as I was running, and I saw my helmet fly through the air in front of me. It was just flying through the air, like the Wizard of Oz almost. And next thing I know, the air pressure lifted me off of the ground and blew me face first into Liberty and West, right at this intersection. And next thing I know, I got hit over the head with a piece of steel. It opened up my head from here all the way to the base of my skull, and all the concrete from the building is just pummeling my body and breaking all my bones, all my ribs, my arm, and I'm buried under the building. And now it's darker than midnight. You can't see anything. It is as black as midnight. I could see nothing, and I can't breathe. I'm suffocating. There's no more air left. And I just figured that I would bleed and suffocate to death, and all I could do is move my head under the building from side to side, and I could hear people yelling, screaming, and crying all around me. But nobody could see anybody. And next thing I know, there's fires are popping up all around me. I'm in the middle of all these fires. Luckily, 2 of the ambulance crews that I evacuated ran into that building that we just walked in the lobby, and they saw where I was buried. And they came running out afterwards, and they started digging and got me out and carried me into the lobby of this building, and I collapsed on the marble floor. And I was screaming in pain, "Please don't touch me, please don't touch me." I says, "Just leave me alone and run." I says, "I'm not gonna live, I'm not gonna make it. Just go, don't worry about me. I'm not gonna live, I'm not gonna make it." And he says, "No, no, no, we're gonna take you with us." I says, "Please just get out, go, save yourself, get out. I'm not gonna live, I'm dying, I'm not gonna make it." And they says, "No, no, we got a stretcher, we're gonna put you on a boat." I had no idea what they were talking about, but they did have a stretcher, and they strapped me to the stretcher. Next thing you know, I'm laying on the deck of the boat in the back of these buildings, and you know, they're trying to stop the bleeding, they're trying to hold my head together, and I'm screaming in pain because the pain was excruciating. And all of a sudden, I heard a rumble and a roar, and I heard somebody on the boat say, "Oh my God, here comes the other building." Everybody jumped off the building, and I'm laying strapped, and I can't move, and I'm laying on the deck of the boat, but I could hear the building coming. Somehow my finger hit the release belt that had my hands, and the belt opened up, and they had tape on my neck because they thought I had a broken neck. And I ripped the tape, and because I couldn't see, because my eyes were damaged, I felt the doorway in the staircase, and I dove, and I ended up in the engine room of the boat, and now I could hear the glass from the North Tower is raining down on the deck of the boat, and I'm down there by myself for about a half hour. And next thing I could hear people, I could hear up above on the deck, I could hear pounding. And it was people jumping back on the boat, and I hear a big commotion. I heard somebody say, "Start the motor, start the motor." And so I heard somebody say, I'll start it. So somebody came down the narrow staircase. It was pitch black down there where I dove into, and he stepped right on top of me, and I let out a big scream, and I guess I scared him. And he shined the flashlight. He says, "Oh my God." He yelled upstairs, "There's a fireman down here. This guy's not gonna make it." And so the captain came down, he took one look at me, he says, "Oh my God, we gotta get this boat out of here." But he says, we can't get the boat out of here. We don't know where we are. It was still pitch black. But somehow they got the boat off of the mooring of the stanchions, and this is back the boat up. But somebody says, we're gonna get into an accident. There's boats all around us. The captain says, I don't care who you hit. Get this boat out of here. Just back this boat out. And now the motors are revving up, and I'm laying on the boiler room floor, and I'm kind of looking up at this staircase that I dove down, although I don't know I'm looking up the staircase because it's pitch black. And as the boat is rumbling and moving, where I'm looking at the doorway, I could see a faint brown light. And that faint brown light is getting lighter and lighter until all of a sudden the sun is shining right into my eyes, and the boat is skipping. I have no idea where we are. All I know is that we're somewhere, going somewhere. And next thing I know, I wake up. I'm in the operating room of Jersey City Trauma Center. You know, I wake up. I have about 15 doctors and nurses. They're cutting all my clothes off, and by nighttime they're taking a head count, and they're trying to figure out who survived and who's dead. Well, they found my car. And they said the last time we saw him was right underneath the South Tower. So they says, no, he's missing, he's dead. So they have me officially declared dead. And then the firefighters had to call my house to tell my wife that he's dead, you know. And what happened was, when I originally got to the firehouse, I borrowed another firefighter's coat and pants who was off that day and lived upstate. So when they cut off my firefighter clothing at Jersey City Trauma Center, they saw Tommy McNamara's name inside the coat. So they said, So they had Tommy McNamara listed in the hospital. Then Tommy McNamara shows up at the firehouse next morning. This is Tommy, how are you? He says, what do you mean how he couldn't figure it out. This is Tommy, you in Jersey City Trauma Center. He says, no, I was at home, I just came here. He says, well, somebody must have made a mistake, never knowing that there were firefighters in other states, and a couple of days later they identified me, and then they got the message back that I in fact was alive. And of course, you know, now they hear that there was a firefighter who survived the collapse, and the first thing they wanted was local TV stations to come and do an interview. And the doctors came into my room, and first they told me, do you know who you are? And I said, yes. They said, do you know what happened? I says, well, I remember being at the World Trade Center. I don't know, I can't remember everything. They says, well, we want to let you know both buildings have collapsed and 300 to 400 firemen are dead. I'm thinking I was the only one hurt. I was devastated. And he says, we have local news stations here. They like to get a word with you. Are you comfortable talking with them? And I said, sure, but I couldn't really see them. So they come in, you know, and they surrounded my bed in the hospital with lights and cameras and sticking microphones, like, you know, and they says to me, no, sometimes they just don't know what to ask you. So the first question is, are you a New York City firefighter? I said, yes, I am. And he says, were you hurt at the World Trade Center? I felt like saying, no, I fell off my skateboard. I'm like, what are you kidding me? You got to take a look at me, right? So he says, so I'm saying to myself, this interview isn't going to go too well. He says, why do you think you survived the collapse? I have no idea why I survived. First of all, I'm thinking I'm the only one hurt. I don't even know that I'm a survivor. I just think I'm an injured firefighter. So I'm thinking, I says, how do you answer, like, why do you think you survived? So, and this is a true story. I says, well, if you owe out as much money as I owe out, you'd have a lot of people praying for you too. And they didn't know what to say after that. This is a true story, you know? But anyway, I was in the hospital about a week, and finally I was, you know, released, and I fought to come back to work for a couple of years, and they said, you'll never go back, and they retired me for disability. And now I go around the world, you know, doing the whole presentation on that day, you know, on the history of the Trade Center, the design of it, the collapse, the lessons learned, and future considerations for these types of buildings and safety.